Hello there, everyone. Welcome to Whisper Zone. I am your storyteller, and I'm here to guide you tonight. I know many of you use these videos to drift off to sleep, so before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. I knew then that I wasn't dealing with anything human anymore. The next day, Maria Standing Bear showed up at my door. She was a small woman, but she had this way of looking at you that made you feel like she could see right through you. Her long gray hair was tied back, and she carried a bag made of old deerskin. "You've seen it, haven't you?" she asked, not bothering with hello. "The hunger spirit, the one that walks in winter." I told her everything, about the voices, the handprints, Wolf's frozen body. She listened quietly, nodding like she'd heard it all before. "My grandmother," she said, "lost her entire family to the Wendigo in 1897. It comes when the winter is deepest and people are most desperate. It makes them hear things, see things, makes them hungry in a way food can't fix." She opened her bag and started pulling out strange-looking things. Bundles of herbs, small bones tied with red string, and little bags of something that smelled like cedar. That's when Deputy Morris burst in. He looked terrible. His eyes were red and wild, and he'd lost weight since I'd last seen him. He was scratching his arms so hard they were bleeding. "I'm so hungry," he kept saying. "So hungry. Nothing helps. I can hear it in my head telling me things, showing me things." Maria took one look at him and moved away, pulling me with her. "He's got the hunger," she whispered. "The Wendigo's already in his mind." Frank's head snapped up at her voice. They weren't human anymore. They were white like ice." "I can smell your meat," he said in a voice that wasn't quite his. Then he lunged at us. I didn't want to do it. Frank was my friend, but when he came at us with his hands like claws and his mouth open way too wide, I had to. I grabbed my rifle and shot him. The sound was deafening in the small cabin. Frank fell, but he was still trying to crawl toward us, making these awful hungry noises. Maria pulled out a handful of herbs, lit them, and threw them on him. Frank screamed, not a human scream, but something that sounded like wind howling through ice caves. Then he finally stopped moving. "It's getting stronger," Maria said, looking out the window at the swirling snow. "The more it feeds, the stronger it gets. Your friend Wolf, those missing people, it's building up power. Soon it'll be strong enough to take physical form." She turned to me with those knowing eyes. "There's only one way to stop it now, the old ways, but it will take a sacrifice." Outside, the wind picked up, and I swear I could hear laughter in it. Lots of voices laughing, all at once. The temperature dropped so fast the windows cracked. Maria gripped my arm. "It's coming tonight. We have to be ready." I looked down at Frank's body, at what the Wendigo's hunger had done to my friend, and knew we didn't have a choice. Maria worked, fast as the sun went down. She placed her sacred items around my cabin. Bones at the windows, herbs over the doors, and strange symbols drawn with red clay on the walls. All the while she taught me words in her language, making me repeat them until I got them right. "These are the old words," she said. "Words of binding, words of power. When the time comes, you must say them exactly as I taught you." The storm hit just after dark, but this wasn't any normal blizzard. The snow came sideways, and the wind sounded like it had words in it. Hundreds of voices screaming and crying all at once. The temperature dropped so low that the metal hinges on the doors started to crack. "It's testing the barriers," Maria said calmly, lighting bundles of herbs. "Looking for a way in." That's when we started seeing them in the storm, shapes moving in the swirling snow. Sometimes they looked like people I knew, Sarah, Wolf, Frank. Other times they were something else, something tall and wrong, with arms that reached all the way to the ground. The voices started again, but this time they were angry. They screamed, horrible things, trying to make us scared, trying to make us run outside. The windows frosted over with those handprints again, but bigger this time, pressing so hard I thought the glass would break. "Whatever happens," Maria said. "Whatever you see or hear, don't open that door. Don't look into its eyes. That's how it gets you. Makes you see things you want so badly that you'll walk right into its arms. The thing outside must have heard her because suddenly all the voices stopped. The silence was worse than the screaming. Then we heard it. Slow, heavy footsteps in the snow coming closer. Each step made the whole cabin shake. I raised my rifle, though I knew regular bullets wouldn't do much good. Maria had blessed them with her strange herbs and words, but still my hands were shaking. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. Something tapped on it. Tap, 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 with fingers that sounded more like ice than flesh. "Marcus?" Sarah's voice, sweet and sad. "Why did you let me die alone, Marcus?" I nearly dropped my rifle. Maria grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in hard. "It lies," she whispered. "It always lies." The thing pretending to be Sarah started crying, and I felt my heart breaking all over again. Then its voice changed, became something awful, like ice cracking and wind howling all mixed together. The door began to freeze, ice spreading across it like living fingers. The walls groaned as the cold tried to crush my cabin. Maria started chanting, throwing herbs into the fire she'd built in my wood stove. The flames turned blue and green. That's when it hit me, the hunger. It came out of nowhere, this terrible empty feeling like I hadn't eaten in weeks. My stomach felt like it was full of razor blades. I could smell meat, fresh meat, just outside. The door. Maria saw what was happening to me. She grabbed my face with both hands, forcing me to look at her. "It's not real," she said firmly. "Fight it." Then she did something I'll never forget. She walked to the door, pulled out a knife, and cut her own palm. "Ancient One," she called out in her native tongue, "I offer you a trade." Before I could stop her, Maria threw open the door and ran outside into the storm. The thing was waiting there, tall as two men, thin as a skeleton, with antlers like a nightmare deer, and eyes that glowed like blue fire. "Follow me, Ancient One," Maria shouted. "I am the last of those who bound you before. Come take your revenge." The Wendigo's head snapped toward her. It moved like lightning, chasing her into the whirling snow. I grabbed my blessed rifle and ran after them, following their tracks toward the cave where this all started. The cold hit me like a truck. Every breath felt like swallowing glass. But I kept running, remembering all those people it had killed, remembering Frank and Wolf, remembering how it had used Sarah's voice to try to trick me. I found them at the cave entrance. Maria was standing there, chanting those words she'd taught me, her hands raised. The Wendigo was closing in on her, its long arms reaching. "Now, Marcus," she screamed. "The words. Say them now." I started chanting, my voice joining hers. The Wendigo turned to me, and for a second, I saw Sarah in those ice blue eyes. But I kept chanting, even as tears froze on my face. Maria pulled out every charm and sacred item she had, throwing them at the creature's feet. She kept chanting, louder and louder, even as frost started forming on her skin. "The cave!" she yelled. "Drive it back into the cave." I fired my blessed rifle again and again. The bullets didn't hurt it, but each hit pushed it back a step. Maria's chanting grew stronger, and I could see something happening, like ropes of light wrapping around the Wendigo, pulling it toward the cave. Then Maria did the bravest and most terrible thing I've ever seen. She ran straight at the monster, grabbing it around its ice-cold waist. "Complete the circle," she shouted. "Seal us both in." I wanted to stop her, to save her, but I knew this was the only way. I finished the chant exactly as she'd taught me, my voice cracking on the last words. There was a sound like 1,000 windows breaking all at once. The cave entrance glowed bright as day, and then silence. When I could see again, the entrance was sealed with ice thicker than any I'd ever seen. Maria and the Wendigo were gone. That was 30 years ago. I'm still the ranger here. Every winter, I check the cave. The ice never melts, and sometimes, when the wind is strong, I hear chanting coming from deep inside. Maria's last gift to us all. I still wear her charm. The winters are still hard up here, but normal hard now. Natural hard. The kind of hard humans can handle. Sometimes people ask me why I stay. after everything that happened. I tell them I'm standing guard. As long as I'm here, as long as someone remembers, that cave stays sealed. And if anyone ever goes missing in these woods in winter, well, I know what signs to look for now. The night my wife's voice called to me from the frozen woods, I knew the stories my grandmother told me were true. But let me start from the beginning, back when I thought the cold was the only thing I needed to fear in these woods. My name is Marcus Thorne, and I've been the ranger at Boundary Waters for longer than I care to remember. The winter of 1962 was different, though. That was the year Sarah, my wife of 23 years, lost her battle with cancer. The doctors said it was quick, but watching someone you love fade away is never quick enough. After the funeral, I couldn't stand the pity in people's eyes anymore. So I did what any broken man might do. I ran away to the one place that always made sense to me: the wilderness. The ranger station up here is about as far from civilization as you can get in Minnesota. And that's exactly what I wanted. The station itself isn't much. Just a solid log cabin with a rusty metal roof and windows that rattle when the wind picks up. But it's home now. My old M1 Garand rifle from my Marine days hangs above the fireplace, and Sarah's picture sits on my desk. Some nights, when the temperature drops to 40 below, I sit in my chair and talk to that picture, telling her about my day like I used to. I should mention that I'm good at what I do. 25 years in these woods taught me every animal track, every tree crack, and every way the wind can trick you. Back in the Marines, they made me a sniper because I could read the wind better than anyone else. Those same skills keep me alive up here, where a wrong turn in a blizzard means you never turn again. My grandmother, she was full-blooded Ojibwe, used to tell me stories about winter spirits when I was a kid. "Marcus," she'd say, her dark eyes serious in the firelight, "when the winter grows teeth, remember that not all who walk in the snow leave tracks." I'd laugh it off then. Guess I should have listened better. It all started with that deer I found. The temperature had been dropping for days, hitting the kind of cold that makes trees explode. I was doing my usual patrol, checking on the few crazy ice fishermen who brave these parts when I saw it. What was left of it anyway. At first I thought it was just another wolf kill, but wolves don't leave perfect circles of ice around there. Prey's wounds. And wolves definitely don't freeze their meat solid before eating it. That same evening, my radio started picking up strange sounds between the usual check-in calls. It was like whispers at first, so faint I thought I was imagining them. But then they got clearer. They sounded like words, but not in any language I knew. That's when I remembered another thing my grandmother used to say. "The worst storms don't come from the sky, grandson. They come from the things the storm wakes up." I didn't know it then, but that frozen deer was just the beginning. What came after? Well, that's when things got really bad. The next morning I decided to follow the tracks from the frozen deer. Something wasn't right about how they just stopped in the middle of nowhere, like whatever made them had simply vanished into thin air. 25 years of tracking in these woods, and I'd never seen anything like it. That's when I found the cave. It wasn't on any of my maps, which was strange because I thought I knew every rock and hollow in my territory. The entrance was small, just big enough for a person to squeeze through. I clicked on my flashlight and went inside. The beam caught something on the walls that made my heart skip a beat. Cave paintings. Old ones. They showed stick figures running from something tall and skinny, with 2 long arms and antlers like a deer. The thing in the paintings was surrounded by what looked like snowflakes or ice crystals. But what really got to me was how the paint seemed fresher in some spots, like someone or something had been touching up the pictures recently. I took some photos with my old camera and got out of there fast. Something about that cave made the air feel wrong, like it was too cold even for winter. When I got back to my station, there was a small leather pouch hanging on my door. Inside was a charm made of bones and feathers, tied together with sinew. A note written in shaky handwriting said, "Wear this, Ranger Thorne, the old evil walks again." It was signed by Maria Standing Bear, one of the tribal elders I'd helped last summer when she got lost picking berries. That night, the radio got worse. Between static bursts, I started hearing things that shouldn't be there. Sometimes it sounded like people crying. Other times like someone whispering my name. I tried calling the other stations, but all I got back was more static and those awful whispers. The animals noticed it too. Usually winter nights are full of sounds. Owls hooting, wolves howling, even the occasional moose trudging through the snow. But now, nothing. It was like every living thing had packed up and left. The silence was so complete it made my ears ring. The cold got worse too. My thermometer dropped to 40 below, then 50. The trees started making these awful cracking sounds as their insides froze and split. One night I heard a boom like a gunshot. It was a huge old pine exploding from the cold right outside my station. But the worst part? The thing that really started to scare me? Every morning there were new tracks in the snow around my cabin. They looked almost human, but the stride was too long, and the footprints were so deep they must have been made by something impossibly heavy. And they always led back toward that cave. It was 3 nights later when I heard Sarah's voice. I was doing my last check of the windows before bed when it came floating through the darkness. Marcus, honey, I'm cold. Please, let me in. It sounded exactly like her, that little catch in her voice she'd get when she was worried about something. My hands started shaking so bad I dropped my flashlight. I knew deep in my bones that it couldn't be Sarah. I'd held her hand. When she passed, I'd buried her, but that voice, Marcus, please, it's so cold out here. I grabbed my rifle and forced myself to look out the window. The security light showed nothing but swirling snow. Then I saw it. A shape, woman-sized, just at the edge of the light. It looked like it was wearing a dress, like the one we buried. Sarah in. I shut all the lights off and sat in the dark, my rifle across my knees, while that thing wearing my wife's voice called to me until sunrise. The next morning, I found Wolf Peterson. Wolf was a local hunter, tough as old boots and smart about the woods. He'd been hunting these parts for 30 years. I found him frozen solid, still standing up, like he'd been running when the cold caught him. His eyes and mouth were filled with ice crystals, and his face, I'll never forget the look of pure terror frozen on his face. I called Deputy Frank Morris on the radio. Frank was new to the area, but he was a good man. He helped me get Wolf's body back to town. On the way, Frank told me other people had gone, missing in the past week. 3 ice fishermen hadn't come home. A teenager taking a snowmobile shortcut was 2 days overdue. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Wolf, about those missing people. I dug through the station's old records and found something that made my blood run cold. A journal from 1932, written by the ranger before me. He described the same things. The unnatural cold, the voices, people going missing. The journal ended, mid-sentence. I was reading it when the whispers started again. But this time, it wasn't just Sarah's voice. It was Wolf's voice too, and others I didn't recognize. All calling out at once. They were coming from different directions, like something was surrounding the station. Then the windows started frosting over, even though the heater was running, full blast. But this wasn't normal frost. It was forming handprints, huge ones, with fingers too long and thin to be human. I could hear something scraping at the walls, moving around the station. I grabbed Maria's charm and held it tight. The leather felt warm, even in the freezing air. That's when I noticed something weird. The frost wouldn't form near the charm. It was like the thing had made a circle of protection around it. I spent that whole night huddled in the corner of my office, watching those handprints appear one by one on every window. The voices kept calling, using different tricks to try to get me to come outside. Sometimes they sounded like people crying for help. Sometimes they were angry, screaming threats. But I just held on to that charm and waited for morning. When the sun finally came up, I found deep scratches in the wooden walls of my station, right where I'd heard the scraping. They were too high up for any normal person to reach. The deer was running in the wrong direction. I've been a park ranger at Yellowstone for 15 years, and I'd never seen anything like it. Animals always run away from the geysers when they're about to blow, but this whole herd was charging, straight toward Old Faithful. Something was spooking them, something worse than boiling water shooting into the sky. My name is Beth Crawford, and I've seen enough weird stuff in these woods to fill a book. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened in the summer of 1995. I grabbed my binoculars from the passenger seat of my truck and watched the deer. Their eyes were wide with terror, and foam dripped from their mouths. Behind them, the morning fog rolled across the ground in thick waves. The air smelled wrong, like copper pennies and rotten eggs. "Crawford, you copy?" My radio crackled, making me jump. It was Dave from dispatch. "Yeah, I copy." I kept my eyes on the deer. A red-tailed hawk suddenly dropped from the sky, dead, landing just a few feet from my truck. Its feathers were missing in patches, like something had burned them away. "We've got reports of dead cattle up by the north entrance. Rancher says they look weird. Can you check it out?" I thought about Jack, my old partner. He'd disappeared 6 months ago while investigating similar reports. We found his ranger hat by a cave entrance, but his body was never recovered. The search team said he probably fell into one of the hot springs, but I never believed that. Jack was too careful, too experienced. I'll head there now. I tucked my thermal imaging camera into my belt. It was a new piece of equipment we'd gotten after Jack vanished. The scientists said it would help us track animal movements, but honestly, it made me feel a little safer. The deer had disappeared into the mist, but I could still hear them crashing through the underbrush. As I started my truck, I noticed something. In my side mirror, tracks in the mud. They looked almost human, but too big, with long claw marks at the ends of each toe. And they were smoking, like whatever made them was hot enough to bake the earth. I'd been trained to handle everything from lost hikers to angry bears. They taught us about wildlife patterns, rescue procedures, and how to stay calm in emergencies. But they never trained us for what I was about to face. Nothing could have prepared me for the ancient evil that was waking up in Yellowstone. The first rays of sunlight hit the morning mist, turning it blood red. Somewhere in the distance, heard a sound that wasn't quite human and wasn't quite animal. My hand shook as I put the truck in gear. I didn't know it then, but this was the beginning of the longest and last week of my normal life. The rancher's face was white as a sheet when I pulled up to his fence. 3 of his cows lay dead in the field, and I knew right away why. He'd sounded so scared on the phone. I'd seen dead animals before, that's part of the job. But this was different. The cows looked like they'd been turned inside out, but there was no blood anywhere. The grass around them was dry. It was like something had sucked every drop of liquid from their bodies. Never seen anything like it. The rancher said, keeping his distance. "Found them like this at sunrise. My dogs won't go near them, they just sit and howl." I pulled out my notebook, trying to act normal even though my stomach was in knots. "Any strange noises last night? Lights, maybe?" He shook his head. "Dead quiet. That's what bothered me. No crickets, no owls, nothing." I walked closer to examine. The cows, my boots sinking into the mud. That's when I saw the tracks. The same ones from earlier, but clearer this time. They were huge, like basketball-sized footprints, and steam still rose from them despite the cool morning air. My radio buzzed. "Crawford here," I answered, glad for the distraction. "Beth, it's Dr. Torres from the geology department. You need to see this. I'm by the old burial grounds." I knew Richard Torres. He studied the park's volcanic activity. Smart guy, always. Excited about rocks and dirt samples. But his voice sounded different today. Scared. "On my way," I said, then turned to the rancher. "I'm calling in a team to remove the cows. Keep everyone away from this area for now." As I drove to meet Torres, the sky turned a weird reddish color. At first, I thought it was just sunrise, but then something wet hit my windshield. I turned on the wipers and my heart nearly stopped. The drops were dark red. I pulled over and got out, watching in horror as red rain fell from rust-colored clouds. It felt warm on my skin and smelled like old pennies. Blood. It was raining blood. My thermal camera started beeping like crazy. Through its screen, I saw something that made no sense. A patch of heat in the shape of a person, standing in the trees. But when I looked with my naked eyes, nothing was there. "This is Ranger Crawford," I said into my radio, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to close the north section of the park, now." The thing in the trees moved. On the thermal screen, it looked like it was turning to face me. That's when I heard it, a sound like somebody dragging meat across gravel getting closer. I jumped back in my truck and slammed the door, my hands shaking as I started the engine. In my rearview mirror, I saw something step out of the trees. Looked almost human. Almost. I hit the gas and didn't look back. I found Dr. Torres kneeling by the old burial ground, his hands shaking as he held some kind of ancient stone. Around him, the ground was scattered with old pottery pieces and bone fragments that the rain had washed up. "Beth," he said without looking up, "these aren't normal Native American artifacts. The symbols, they're warnings." I knelt beside him, rain dripping from my hat. The red rain had stopped, but everything was stained pink. Warnings about what? "There's reason this ground was marked as forbidden." He handed me the stone. It had a picture carved into it, a tall, twisted figure standing over smaller human shapes. The tribe's elder, Mary Running Wolf. She told me these grounds were sealed, hundreds of years ago, to keep something in. A cold wind swept through the trees, carrying a smell like rotting meat. My thermal camera started beeping again. "We need to leave," I said, grabbing Torres's arm. "Now!" But he pulled away, reaching for another artifact. "Just let me gather these samples." The markings show some kind of ritual. The beeping from my camera turned into a sharp alarm. Through its screen, I saw a massive heat signature moving behind Torres. But when I looked up, there was nothing there. "Richard, please," I whispered, drawing my gun. "Something's wrong." He must have finally heard the fear in my voice because he started packing his bag. That's when we heard it, that awful dragging sound, closer than ever. "Run!" I screamed. We sprinted for my truck. I could hear something charging through the trees behind us, branches snapping like gunshots. Torres was faster than me, pulling ahead. Then he screamed. I spun around and saw something that will haunt me forever. A shape like a person but wrong, too tall, too thin, with arms that reached to the ground. It had Torres by the legs. Through my thermal camera, it blazed like a forest fire. I fired 3 shots. The thing didn't even flinch. It just stared at me with eyes that glowed like hot coals. "Help!" Torres cried. "Beth, help!" His words turned into a gurgling scream as the creature started peeling him. There's no other word for it. Like someone peeling an orange, but I can't describe it. I fired again and again until my gun clicked empty. The thing looked right at me. Its face was like a mask made of stretched skin, with a smile, too wide and too full of teeth. It dropped Torres's body, arranging his remains in a strange pattern on the ground. I ran. I ran faster than I've ever run in my life. Behind me, I heard a sound, like laughter but broken and wrong, like recordings of different laughs played on top of each other. When I finally made it back to my truck, I threw up. Then I radioed for backup, trying to explain what happened. Between sobs, they probably thought I was crazy, but I knew what I saw. And worse, I knew it saw me too. Later, when the search team found Torres's body, it was exactly how the creature had arranged it. Laid out like one of the warning symbols from the stones, his skin spread around him like wings. A message. It was sending us a message, and this was just the beginning. I couldn't sleep after what happened to Torres. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thing smile. The police wanted to blame a bear attack, but I knew better. Bears don't arrange their victims like artwork. Mary Running Wolf was waiting on my porch the next morning. She was a small woman with deep wrinkles and eyes that had seen too much. Without a word, she handed me a cup of tea that smelled like pine needles. "You saw it?" she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, my hands shaking around the warm cup. "What is it?" A skinwalker, but not like the stories. She sat beside me, her voice low. This one is ancient. My people sealed it under the burial ground centuries ago, but the recent earthquakes broke the barriers. A loud click made us both jump. Peter Johnson, a wildlife photographer, was standing at the bottom of my porch steps with his camera. "Sorry," he said, lowering the camera. "I'm doing a story on the strange animal behavior in the park, but I caught something weird in my photos yesterday." He showed us his camera's screen. Most of the pictures were normal: trees, geysers, animals. Then he showed us one that made my blood run cold. In the background, barely visible, was a tall figure. Its skin seemed to be moving, changing, like it couldn't decide what shape to be. "That's not the strangest part," Peter said, flipping to the next photo. The figure was closer now and different, shorter, more human. It had Torres's face. Deputy Laura Hayes pulled up in her patrol car just then. She was young, new to the area, and looked worried. "We found more cattle," she said. "But it's different this time. They're changed, like something tried to turn them inside out but got halfway through." Mary grabbed my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "It's getting stronger. The more it feeds, the more it can change. It will keep killing, keep taking new shapes, until it has enough power to free its brothers." "Brothers," I whispered. "There are more, sleeping deeper in the earth. If it wakes them..." She shook her head. "This land will become a hunting ground." My thermal camera started beeping in my truck. Through the window, I could see its screen flashing red. The temperature around us was dropping fast, even though it was noon in summer. "Get inside," I said, pushing everyone toward my cabin. "Now!" We barely made it. Through the window, I watched the air shimmer like hot pavement. A shape moved through the heat waves, first looking like Torres, then like one of the dead cows, then like something I can't describe. Mary started drawing symbols on my windows with what looked like ash. "These will hold it back, but not for..." Peter kept taking pictures, his hands shaking. Deputy Hayes drew her gun, but we all knew bullets wouldn't help us. Not against something that could wear your face as easily as you wear a mask. And somewhere in the distance, the ground began to shake. The windows of my cabin frosted over, even though it was summer. Peter kept taking pictures through the glass, his camera clicking like a nervous heartbeat. "Something's wrong," he suddenly said, looking at his camera screen. "My skin, it looks strange in these photos." He was right. In the pictures, his hands were changing, becoming longer, darker, like they were made of smoke. When I touched his arm with my thermal camera, it showed his body temperature rising fast. "It touched you," Mary said quietly, "when we were outside. Now its power is spreading inside you." Peter started shaking. "I can hear it in my head. It wants me to open the door. It wants me to let it in." His voice changed, becoming deeper, rougher. Deputy Hayes pointed her gun at him. "Don't move!" But it was too late. Peter's body bent in ways a human body shouldn't. His skin turned black and started smoking. He screamed, a sound that started human, but ended as something else. "I'm sorry," I whispered, reaching for my own gun. Peter had been a friend. He didn't deserve this. Mary stepped forward, pulling out a small leather bag. "There's another way." She started spreading a circle of colored sand around Peter. "But it will cost me everything." She began to sing in her native language, her voice strong and clear. The air in the cabin got thick and heavy like before a storm. Peter's twisted body froze in place. "Beth," Mary said between verses, "when this is done, you must take my body to the burial ground. Use my blood to draw the symbols I showed you. It will trap the skinwalker long enough for you to finish this." Before I could stop her, she grabbed Peter's changed form. There was a flash of light that burned my eyes. When I could see again, Peter was human again, unconscious but alive. But Mary was gone, just gone. Like she'd become part of the air itself. The moment of relief didn't last. Deputy Hayes screamed. Through the window we saw it. The skinwalker, wearing Mary's face, smiling with too many teeth. Hayes ran for the door. I tried to grab her, but she was too fast. "I can shoot it. I can..." The thing moved like lightning. One moment Hayes was on my porch, the next she was in its grasp. Her body went stiff and I watched in horror as her blood began to glow under her skin like it was boiling. When she fell, her body was arranged in another warning symbol. The message was clear. No more hiding. I grabbed the unconscious Peter and ran for my truck. I knew what I had to do now. Mary had given her life to show me how to stop this thing. I just hoped I was strong enough to finish what she started. I drove to the burial ground with Peter still unconscious in my truck, the thermal camera showing hot spots all around us. The skinwalker was following, sometimes looking like Mary, sometimes like Hayes, sometimes like things I can't describe. The ground shook harder as I got closer to the burial site. Steam burst from new cracks in the earth, and the air smelled like rotten eggs and blood. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, but I remembered what Mary said. Use her blood to draw the symbols. But Mary was gone. Then I realized she wasn't gone. She had become part of Peter when she saved him. I'm sorry, I whispered to Peter's sleeping form, but we need her blood to stop this. I parked near the burial ground and cut Peter's arm carefully with my pocket knife. His blood was different now. It shimmered with tiny lights like stars trapped under his skin. Mary's final gift. The skinwalker appeared at the edge of the trees. It wasn't trying to look human anymore. Its body was like black smoke with red eyes, and its arms reached all the way to the ground. When it smiled, I saw hundreds of teeth. You're not taking this land, I said, trying to sound brave even though I was terrified. Mary showed me how to stop you. It laughed, a sound like breaking glass and screaming animals mixed together. The ground cracked more and I felt heat rising from below. It was trying to wake its brothers. I started drawing the symbols Mary had shown me using Peter's blood. Each mark glowed when I finished it. The skinwalker charged at me, but it couldn't cross the first symbol. You killed my partner Jack, didn't you? I asked, drawing faster. And Torres and Hayes. The thing wore Jack's face for a moment, grinning. Then Torres's. Then Hayes's. It was trying to scare me, but I kept drawing. When I finished the last symbol, the ground split open between us. But instead of more steam, bright light poured out. The skinwalker screamed, not mocking this time, but afraid. Nature itself seemed to wake up. The trees bent in impossible ways. Rocks flew through the air. Old Faithful erupted even though we were miles away from it. The light from the ground got brighter and brighter. The skinwalker tried to run, but the symbols held it in place. I saw other shapes moving deep in the earth, its brothers trying to wake up. But the light touched them, and they burned away like mist in the morning sun. This is for Jack, I said, completing the ritual like Mary taught me. And for everyone else you killed. The thing that looked like smoke and nightmares started burning. As it died, it wore every face it had ever stolen, screaming with every voice. Then the light took it too. The ground sealed itself. The symbols burned away, and everything went quiet. But I knew somehow that this place would never be the same, and neither would I. A week has passed since that night at the burial ground. Peter recovered in the hospital, but he doesn't remember anything. Maybe that's for the best. They found Jack's ranger badge near where the skinwalker burned away. I buried it under a young pine tree where the morning sun hits first. It felt right. Somehow. The official report says it was all an earthquake with toxic gases from underground making people see things. Nobody wants to believe what really happened, but the changes in me are real. I can feel things now. When I walk through the park, I know which animals are sick before I see them. I can sense storms coming hours before the clouds show up. Sometimes, when I touch the ground, I see flashes of the past. Ancient creatures, old rituals, memories buried in the earth. Mary's last gift wasn't just saving Peter. She made me a guardian, like the ones her people had centuries ago. The thermal camera stays in my truck these days. I don't need it anymore. My eyes can see heat and cold on their own now. Every full moon, I go to the burial ground and leave small offerings, flowers, cornmeal, clean water. Not because I have to, but because it feels right. The land remembers what we did to protect it. Sometimes late at night I hear whispers in languages I shouldn't understand. The park feels different now, more awake, more aware. And sometimes when I look in mirrors or still water, my eyes glow just a little, like dying embers in a campfire. I'm still a ranger, still protecting this land. But now I'm protecting it from things most people don't believe in. Things that hide in shadows and wear stolen faces. Because even though we stopped the skinwalker, I know there are more things out there in the dark. And now, I'm ready for them. The first time I heard them howl, I knew they weren't normal wolves. After 15 years of working with wolves in Yellowstone, you learn to recognize their voices like they're old friends. But these howls, they sounded almost human, like someone trying to copy a wolf but getting it wrong in the worst possible way. I'm Victoria Reeves, Vic to everyone who knows me, and I've been a ranger longer than some of our junior staff have been alive. At 39, with my Army medic background and years of tracking experience, I thought I'd seen everything. The Ozark National Forest was supposed to be a quiet transfer, a change of pace from Yellowstone. Just me, my trusty Winchester rifle, which I've modified myself over the years, and endless miles of beautiful forest to patrol. That autumn changed everything. The harvest moon hung low and orange in the sky that September, making the shadows between the trees deeper than they should have been. Something about the forest felt different, wrong. The locals had been telling stories about wolf people for generations, tales I'd dismissed as campfire stories meant to scare tourists. I should have listened closer. It started with the pets. First a German shepherd from the Miller family, then the Thompsons' 3 cats, all vanishing within a week. People in the nearby towns were scared, and they had every right to be. But what really caught my attention were the tracks I found during my night patrol. They were wolf prints, all right, but massive, bigger than any wolf I'd ever tracked. And sometimes, just sometimes, they seemed to change as I followed them. The back paws would stretch, becoming almost foot-like. I took photos, measured them, compared them to every known species. Nothing matched. My fellow rangers thought I was overreacting. Even Tim Reynolds, our newest junior ranger, just laughed it off. "Come on, Vic," he'd say. "You've been reading too many horror stories." Tim was 28, fresh-faced, and full of that endless optimism that new rangers always seem to have. He didn't understand yet that sometimes the forest keeps dark secrets. I remember sitting in my cabin that first month, cleaning my Winchester and looking at my wall of certificates, tracking expert, wildlife behavior specialist, advanced wilderness, survival. None of them prepared me for what was coming. The radio crackled with regular reports of strange sightings, shadows moving upright through the trees, livestock killed with almost surgical precision, and those howls, those terrible, almost human howls. The other rangers trusted my judgment, mostly because I'd earned it. When you've spent as much time in the wilderness as I have, you develop a sixth sense for danger. And everything in me was screaming that we weren't dealing with ordinary predators. The forest itself seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for something to break loose. I just didn't realize then that I'd be the one standing between whatever was out there and the people I'd sworn to protect, or that the line between predator and prey would become so blurred that I'd start questioning everything I thought I knew about nature, about wolves, and about myself. What happened in those woods during those autumn months would change me forever. And it all started with those howls, those damned almost human howls. The night everything changed started like any other. Tim and I were doing our regular patrol, checking the camping areas near Eagle Rock. The moon was bright enough that we barely needed our flashlights. Tim was talking about his upcoming weekend plans, voice echoing a bit too loudly through the trees. "Tim," I whispered, grabbing his arm. "Listen." The forest had gone completely silent. No crickets, no owls, nothing. In all my years as a ranger, I'd learned that when the forest goes quiet, it means something's wrong. That's when we heard it. Branches cracking in the darkness, but not like a deer or bear would make. These sounds came from different directions at once, like we were being circled. "Vic?" Tim's voice shook a little. "What's out there?" Before I could answer, a howl split the night. That terrible, almost human sound I'd been hearing. But this time it was closer, much closer, and it wasn't alone. Other howls joined in, creating a sound that made my skin crawl. Back to the truck, I said firmly. Now. We turned around, walking quickly but carefully. The sounds followed us, moving through the trees on either side. I kept my Winchester ready, scanning the shadows. That's when I saw them. Eyes reflecting our flashlight beams but too high off the ground to be normal wolves. And they were walking on two legs. Tim saw them too. He panicked and ran. "Tim, no!" I shouted, but it was too late. What happened? Next still haunts my dreams. The shadows moved with impossible speed. Tim screamed and then... silence. I fired my rifle into the darkness, trying to scare them off, but I knew it was already too late. The next morning, it took us 3 hours to find all the pieces. Tim's body had been torn apart and scattered, across 3 miles of forest. The worst part? It wasn't random animal violence. The pieces had been placed deliberately, like some kind of message. The police called it a bear attack, but I knew better. Bears don't scatter their kills. Bears don't place body parts in perfect circles. And bears definitely don't leave footprints that look half-human. Dr. Linda Morrison, our wildlife biologist, was the only one who believed me. She'd been studying unusual wolf behavior in the area for months. "There's something different about these predators, Vic," she told me in her office, spreading out photos of the tracks we'd found. "They're organized, they're intelligent, and they're getting bolder." She was right. Over the next few weeks, more strange things started happening. Campers reported seeing wolf-like creatures standing upright at the edge of their campsites, just watching. We found a pack of normal wolves torn apart in a clearing, not eaten, just killed and arranged in a strange pattern. But the most disturbing thing? The creatures were learning. Every trap we set was avoided. Every camera we put up was either destroyed or worse, showed us glimpses of something impossible. Shapes that seemed to shift between wolf and human in the grainy footage. One night I found fresh tracks near the ranger station. As I knelt down to examine them, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Words spoken in a rough, growling voice from the darkness. "Leave. Not your forest." I spun around, rifle ready, but whatever spoke was already gone. But one thing was crystal clear. These weren't just animals we were dealing with. They were something else entirely, something that could think, plan, and apparently talk. And they wanted us gone. Dr. Morrison wouldn't listen to me when I told her it was too dangerous to study them alone. "Vic, this could be the discovery of the century," she'd said, setting up her observation blind near where we'd found the most tracks. "These creatures aren't just wolves. They're something entirely new." Those were the last words she ever said to me. We found her the next morning. Unlike Tim's scattered remains, Dr. Morrison's body was placed right in the middle of her camp, arranged like a museum display. Her research papers were scattered around her, and one page was placed carefully on her chest. Her own notes about pack hierarchy with claw marks drawn through the words. That same day, Jake Wheeler, one of our local hunters, came to my office. Jake had been hunting these woods for 20 years, but I'd never seen him look scared before. "Something bit me, Vic," he said, rolling up his sleeve. The bite mark was huge, but that wasn't what worried me. The skin around it looked strange, almost like fur was trying to grow there. "When did this happen?" I asked, reaching for my first aid kit. 2 nights ago, but that's not the worst part." Jake's voice shook. I can hear them in my head. They're calling me. And last night I looked in the mirror and my eyes, they were yellow. I knew what he meant about the calling. I'd been hearing it too. Not with my ears, but somewhere deep in my mind. Like a pull trying to draw me into the forest at night. Over the next few days, I watched Jake change. His fingers grew longer, his teeth sharper. He could barely speak anymore, and when he did, his words came out in growls. I kept him in a secure room at the ranger station, but it was like watching someone lose themselves bit by bit. Sheriff Bob McAllister came to check on Jake regularly. "We need to call in the National Guard," he said after seeing Jake's transformation. This is bigger than us. But before we could make that call, Jake broke out. We found his room empty. The steel door bent outward like it was made of paper. All that was left was a handful of human teeth on the floor. That night, Sheriff McAllister took his deputies into the forest to search for Jake. I begged him to wait until daylight, but he wouldn't listen. People are dying, Vic. We end this. Tonight, they found Jake, or what used to be Jake. Only the sheriff's badge came back, covered in deep claw marks and smeared with blood. The creatures were getting bolder. They'd stand at the edge of town now, just visible enough to be seen. People started reporting strange things. Shadows that moved wrong, howls that formed words, and yellow eyes watching from the darkness. But what scared me most was how they hunted. They weren't just attacking randomly anymore. They had strategies. They'd cut power to isolated houses. They'd herd people toward traps. They worked together like soldiers, not animals, and they were learning from each kill. One night, I found a message scratched into my cabin door. Join or hunt. Below it was a dead deer, its neck broken cleanly, a gift, or a warning. I stood there for a long time, my hand on my rifle, listening to those howls in the distance. They weren't just calling to each other anymore. They were calling to me, and deep down, in a place I didn't want to admit existed, part of me wanted to answer. After losing the sheriff, I started watching the creatures more carefully. I needed to understand how they thought, how they moved, what they wanted. My military training kicked in. When facing an enemy, you need to know their patterns. I set up a small observation post in an old hunting blind, high up in a sturdy oak tree. From there, I could see a large part of their hunting territory. What I saw changed everything I thought I knew about them. They weren't just random monsters. They had a system. The smallest ones would scout ahead, moving like shadows between the trees. They could practically disappear into darkness. I started calling this their shadow melding. Behind them, the larger ones would move in formation, like a military unit. But their most frightening ability was how they communicated. One night I watched them take down a large buck. No howls, no sounds at all. But they moved like they could read each other's minds. One would appear on the deer's left, driving it right, where another was waiting. Perfect teamwork without a single noise. I started keeping a journal of everything I saw. They had different roles in the pack. Scouts, hunters, guards, just like a human army. The biggest one, their leader, had a scar across his muzzle. I called him Scarface. He was smart, too smart. They could heal incredibly fast. One night, one of them got caught in a bear trap some hunter had left out. Instead of panicking, the creature just pulled itself free. I watched through my binoculars as the wound closed up within minutes, but their most dangerous weapon was their howl. Not the regular ones, the special ones. One night I saw a deer freeze in its tracks when they howled. It just stood there, completely paralyzed, until they reached it. The poor thing couldn't even try to run. I knew I should have been terrified watching all this, but part of me was fascinated. The more I observed them, the more I realized they weren't evil. They were protecting their territory, just like we protected ours. Then one night, something odd happened. I was in my blind, taking notes, when I felt eyes on me. I looked up to see Scarface himself, standing at the base of my tree. He could have called the others. He could have brought down the whole tree if he wanted to. Instead, he just watched me, and I watched him back. After what felt like hours, he did something that sent chills down my spine. He nodded at me, just once, like a person would. Then he melted back into the shadows. That's when I realized they'd known where I was the whole time. They weren't just letting me watch them. They were watching me too. The next morning, I found fresh tracks around the ranger station. They were testing our defenses, looking for weak spots. More and more often, we'd spot them standing, just at the edge of our floodlights at night, their yellow eyes reflecting in the darkness. They were getting ready for something, and so was I. I started preparing the ranger station like I would a military outpost. Extra lights, reinforced doors, escape routes planned. The few remaining rangers thought I was paranoid. but they helped anyway. Deep down, they knew. A storm was coming. And when it hit, I needed to be ready. They chose the perfect night to attack. A storm was rolling in, the kind that makes you feel tiny in the world. Thunder boomed overhead as dark clouds swallowed the moon, and the wind howled through the trees like a wounded animal. I was alone in the ranger station. The other rangers had left to evacuate the nearby campgrounds after we'd spotted fresh tracks everywhere. Just before the radio went dead, I got their last message. "Everyone's out. Stay safe, Vic." The first sign that something was wrong was when the motion sensor lights started flicking on and off around the station, one by one, in a circle. They weren't just testing the perimeter anymore. They were showing me they had me surrounded. I checked my Winchester one last time and made sure my backup flashlights were ready. The storm was getting closer, and I could feel the air getting heavy, like right before a massive downpour. That's when the power went out. In the sudden darkness, I heard them moving outside, claws clicking on the wooden porch, heavy breathing at the windows. They weren't trying to be quiet anymore. They wanted me to know they were there. I switched on my flashlight and moved to the center of the main room, my back against the big desk. Through the windows, I could see them clearly for the first time. Dozens of yellow eyes reflecting my light back at me. Some at normal wolf height, others much higher up, like they were standing on two legs. A massive shape appeared at the main window, Scarface. Even through the glass, I could see he was different from when I'd first spotted him. Bigger, more human-like in how he stood. His eyes weren't just yellow anymore. They had a kind of intelligence in them that made my skin crawl. He pressed one clawed hand against the window, and in that rough, growling voice I'd heard before, he spoke, "Time to choose." Lightning flashed, and in that bright moment I saw them all, at least 20 of them surrounding the station. Some were crouched low like normal wolves, others stood almost as tall as the roof. Their fur seemed to shift in the darkness, like couldn't decide between animal and human. The rain started falling then, heavy drops hammering the roof. Another flash of lightning, and Scarface was gone from the window. But I could hear them moving, positioning themselves. They weren't just going to break in. They were too smart for that. This was going to be a test. My test. Through the sound of rain and thunder, I heard wood splintering somewhere in the back of the station. They were coming in through multiple points, trying to split my attention. I gripped my rifle tighter and took a deep breath. All my years in the army, all my time tracking wolves, all my experience as a ranger, it had all led to this moment. The door hinges started to creak. A low growl came from the darkness, and then all hell broke loose. They came through every door and window at once. Glass shattered, wood splintered, and suddenly the station was full of moving shadows and glowing eyes. I fired my Winchester, not to kill but to keep them back, the gunshots mixing with thunder. But they were smart. While the smaller ones kept me distracted, diving in and retreating, the bigger ones were slowly closing in from all sides. I backed toward the emergency exit, but a huge shape crashed through the ceiling right in front of me. Scarface. Up close, he was even more terrifying. 9 feet tall, at least, with muscles rippling under dark fur that seemed to shift between wolf and human. His face was somewhere between the two, wolf-like but with expressions that were disturbingly human. The scar across his muzzle glowed silver in the lightning flashes. "No more running," he growled, his voice clearer now, almost normal except for the deep rumble behind it. "You fight me." I knew what this was, a challenge. Just like wolves in the wild, they followed strength. If I refused to fight, I was dead. If I fought and lost, I was dead. But if I fought and won, I set down my rifle slowly. This wasn't going to be about guns. The other creatures formed a circle around us, their eyes gleaming in the darkness. The rain poured in through the broken roof, soaking us both. Lightning flashed again, and Scarface charged. He was faster than anything that big should be, but my army training kicked in. I ducked under his first swipe and landed a solid punch to his ribs. It was like hitting a brick wall, but he growled in surprise. He hadn't expected me to be strong enough to hurt him. We fought in the rain and darkness, lightning flashing like a spotlight. He was stronger, but I was quicker. Every time his claws came close to taking my head off, I slipped away and struck back. My knuckles were bleeding, but I could see I was wearing him down. Then he caught me with a backhand that sent me flying into the wall. Stars exploded in my vision as I hit the ground. Through blurry eyes, I saw him coming in for the kill, but something had changed in the circle of watching creatures. They were restless, shifting. Some of them were growling, not at me, but at Scarface. I realized then they'd seen him get hurt. They'd seen him bleed. He wasn't invincible anymore. Scarface must have sensed it too. He turned to snarl at them, trying to keep them in line. That was my chance. I tackled him with everything I had left, driving us both through the broken door and onto the rain-soaked porch. We rolled together, fighting in the mud, neither of us willing to give up. His claws tore into my shoulder, but I managed to get him in a chokehold. One of the first things they taught us in combat training. Submit. I growled into his ear, tightening my grip. Submit, or I finish this. For a moment, nothing existed except the rain, our ragged breathing, and the choice hanging between us. Then, slowly, Scarface went limp. Not from passing out, by choice. He was yielding. I let him go and stood up, my whole body shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline. Scarface rose to his feet, shook himself, and did something that changed everything. He lowered his head and stepped back, leaving me standing in front of his pack. One by one, the others did the same, bowing their heads, backing away. Even the ones who still looked mostly like wolves laid down, showing their throats. I had won, but more than that, I had earned their respect. That night changed everything, but not in the way you might think. I woke up the next morning in my cabin, my shoulder bandaged with leaves and some kind of paste that smelled like pine. The wounds were already healing, faster than they should have. When I looked in the mirror, I noticed my eyes had a slight yellow tinge in certain lights. Not enough for others to notice, but I knew it was there. The pack didn't leave. Instead, we worked out an agreement. They would stay in the deepest parts of the forest, away from campers and hikers. Every full moon, I'd leave 3 deer in a clearing for them, a tribute that kept both sides happy. In return, they helped keep poachers out of the forest. It's funny how quickly illegal hunting stopped once people started hearing stories about giant wolves that walked like men. Scarface, who I now called Shadow, would sometimes visit my cabin at night. He never came inside, just sat on the porch while I drank coffee. Sometimes he'd talk, his voice getting clearer each time. He told me about their history, about how they'd lived in these woods for hundreds of years, about how humans were starting to take too much of their territory, forcing them to either fight back or disappear. "You understand both sides now," he said one night, looking at me with those intelligent eyes. "That's why you won." He was right. The bite marks on my shoulder had done something to me. I could see better in the dark now. I could hear things from further away. And sometimes, on very quiet nights, I could sense the pack's presence in my mind. Not controlling me, just there. Like having a bunch of wild, dangerous neighbors who you wave to but never invite over for dinner. I filed official reports about animal attacks and territorial disputes, carefully worded to keep the truth hidden. The missing persons cases were marked as unsolved, which still keeps me up some nights. But I know that revealing the truth would only lead to more deaths, soldiers with guns, scientists with cages, and a war that nobody would win. The other rangers noticed changes in the forest. Fewer illegal camping sites, less trash left behind, no more vandalism. They said the forest felt different now, more alive somehow, more watchful. They had no idea how right they were. Sometimes, when I'm doing my night patrol, I'll catch glimpses of them moving through the trees. Shadows that walk like people, eyes that shine with human intelligence. They're not my friends, they're still wild, still dangerous. But we understand each other now. We both want the same thing, to protect this place we call home. Last week, the new ranger asked me if I believed in the local legends about wolf people. I just smiled and told her what I wish someone had told me when I first arrived. The forest keeps its own secrets. Some of them are better left alone. But as I watched her walk away, I caught my reflection in the window. Just for a second, my eyes flashed yellow in the darkness, and somewhere in the distance a wolf howled, a sound that was almost but not quite human. I never thought mountains could whisper until that spring on Mount Rainier. My name is Bill Hudson, and after 20 years of search and rescue work, I thought I'd seen everything the mountain could throw at me. I was wrong. Dead wrong. It all started during the weirdest spring I'd ever seen at Rainier. The temperature was hitting records we'd never seen before. It felt more like summer than spring. The ancient glacier that had been frozen solid for thousands of years was melting faster than anyone could remember. As I watched chunks of ice bigger than houses break off and crash down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. "Hudson, you seeing this?" Tommy, one of my rescue team members, pointed at something dark emerging from the melting ice. We were up at 12,000 feet, checking on some unusual readings our monitoring equipment had picked up. I adjusted my climbing gear and carefully made my way over. The divorce papers I'd signed last month were still fresh in my mind, making me throw myself into work even harder than usual. Maybe that's why I was the first to notice the little things, like how the ice wasn't just melting. It was melting in patterns. Strange, swirling patterns that looked almost like they were made on purpose. That's when we found the first artifact. It was a small stone carving, perfectly preserved in the ice. It looked older than anything I'd ever seen, and the symbols carved into it made my skin crawl. Not because they were scary, but because they seemed to move when you weren't looking directly at them. "Bill, you better call this in," Tommy said, his voice shaking a little. He was staring at something else the ice had given up, a massive handprint pressed into a rock face that had been frozen for who knows how long. The handprint was bigger than my entire torso. I reached for my radio but stopped. The air had suddenly gotten heavy, like right before a storm, but the sky was clear. That's when I heard it, a deep rumble that wasn't quite thunder and wasn't quite an avalanche. It came from inside the mountain itself. The equipment we'd brought up started going crazy. Seismic readings were off the charts, but we couldn't feel any earthquake. Temperature sensors were showing impossible readings, swinging from freezing to warm in seconds. And there was something else, a low frequency our machines could barely detect, like the mountain was humming. I've been an ice climbing specialist for most of my career. I know how mountains work, how ice behaves, how rock moves. But everything happening around us went against everything I knew. As the sun started to set, casting long shadows across the melting glacier, I made a decision that would change my life forever. I decided to stay and figure out what was happening, no matter the cost. Looking back now, I realize that was the moment everything began, the moment the mountain chose to reveal its secrets. And trust me, some secrets are bigger than we're ready for. That night, as our team set up base camp, we saw the first lights. They danced across the snow-covered peaks, but they weren't the northern lights. They moved with purpose, like they were searching for something, or someone. I didn't sleep at all that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel the mountain watching, waiting, and somewhere deep in the ice, something ancient was waking up. The next morning, Dr. James Morrison, our team's geologist, woke everyone up early. The ice had melted enough to reveal something big, a cave opening that definitely wasn't on any of our maps. It was perfectly round, like someone had carved it and disappeared deep into the mountain's heart. "I've been studying this mountain for 30 years, Dr. Morrison said, adjusting his glasses. "This shouldn't be here." His hands shook a little as he took pictures of the strange markings around the cave's mouth. Emily Watson, our team photographer, stepped closer to get better shots. "Look at these symbols," she said quietly. "They're like the ones from that stone we found, but bigger." She was right. The symbols seemed to tell a story, showing tall figures that looked almost human, but not quite. That's when we met Chief Joseph Running Bear. He'd climbed up as soon as he heard about our discovery. moving across the dangerous ice like he'd been born on it. The moment he saw the cave entrance, his face went pale. "My people have stories about this place," he said, touching the carved symbols gently. "Stories about the tall ones who could speak without words and move mountains with their minds. Stories about why this part of the mountain was sealed away." I was about to ask him more when we heard it. A deep, echoing sound from inside the cave, like footsteps, but much too heavy to be human. The ground under our feet trembled slightly with each boom. Mike Tanner, a graduate student who joined our team to study the unusual ice melt, was the first to spot them. "Over there," he whispered, pointing at the fresh snow near the cave. We all saw them then. Footprints. But these weren't from any animal I knew. Each one was nearly 2 feet long with 5 clear toe marks like a giant human foot. The whole team went quiet. These weren't bear tracks. These weren't anything we could explain. And they were fresh. That's when strange things started happening one after another. We found entire groups of trees uprooted in perfect circles, like something had pulled them up and arranged them on purpose. Our equipment kept picking up small earthquakes that seemed to follow patterns, almost like a code. But the lights at night were the scariest part. They weren't just random flashes anymore. They moved like they were intelligent, coming closer to our camp each night. Sometimes they would form shapes that looked like words in a language none of us knew. Emily tried to photograph the lights, but every picture came out blurry or completely black. "It's like they don't want to be photographed," she said, frowning at her camera. Chief Running Bear watched all this with knowing eyes. "The mountain is waking up," he told me one evening, "and what lives inside it, they're waking up too. They've been waiting a long time for the ice to melt." I wanted to dismiss it all, the footprints, the lights, the strange symbols, but I couldn't. 20 years of rescue work had taught me one thing. The mountain doesn't lie. If it's showing you something, you better pay attention. That night, as I sat in my tent listening to those heavy footsteps echo through the ice, I realized we weren't just discovering something. We were being watched, studied, maybe even tested, and whatever was doing the watching was getting ready to show itself. Everything changed the morning we first saw them. The sun wasn't even up yet when the ground started shaking, not like a normal earthquake, but in a rhythm, like giant footsteps coming closer. "Bill, you need to see this." Mike's voice crackled through my radio. He was up on the ridge with Emily, setting up camera equipment. I grabbed my gear and started climbing. I was halfway there when I saw it. Through the early morning mist, a huge shape moved between the trees. It was tall, taller than any bear standing on its back legs. But it wasn't walking like an animal. It was walking like a person, standing, straight and proud. "Nobody move," I whispered into my radio. "Just stay where you are." That's when we realized there wasn't just one. There were 5 of them, spread out in a circle around our camp. They were covered in thick, dark fur, but their faces looked almost human. Their eyes glowed with a soft blue light, like the strange lights we'd been seeing at night. Dr. Morrison started filming them with trembling hands. "This is impossible," he kept saying. "This defies everything we know about—" He never finished that sentence. The largest creature turned its head toward him and its eyes flashed bright blue. The rock face behind Dr. Morrison suddenly cracked. Not naturally, but in a perfect circle around him. Before anyone could move, the rock shifted, pulling him into the mountain face like quicksand. I ran to help, but Chief Running Bear grabbed my arm. "Stop," he shouted. "They're not trying to hurt us, they're sending a warning. The rocks, they're controlling them somehow." He was right. When we finally reached the spot where Dr. Morrison had been, we found his body. The rocks had curved around him so gently that not a single bone was broken. His face was peaceful, like he'd just fallen asleep. The creatures had made sure he didn't suffer. That's when the strangest thing happened. The largest creature looked right at me, and suddenly I could hear words in my head. Not like normal thoughts. These felt different, older somehow. They were showing me images of the mountain from thousands of years ago, of their people living here, protecting something. Deep inside the caves, they're telepathic, Emily whispered, pressing her hands against her temples. "I can hear them too. They're trying to tell us something. But the contact was too much for her. She collapsed, her nose bleeding. When we got her back to camp, her eyes were open but empty, like she was seeing something none of us could see. She kept mumbling about crystals and ancient powers until we got her off the mountain 3 days later. She never woke up properly after that. The creatures didn't attack us. They didn't need to. They showed us their powers in other ways. They could make small earthquakes just by stomping their feet. When it started to snow, they raised their arms, and the storm stopped instantly. Once, when Mike cut his leg on some rocks, one of them touched the ground near him, and glowing crystals grew right out of the stone. The cut healed as soon as he touched them. Chief Running Bear watched all this with a mix of fear and respect. My ancestors called them the Guardians, he told us. They said they protect something sacred inside the mountain, something powerful, something that was never supposed to be found. That night I sat alone by our camp watching the creatures move around the mountain slopes. They weren't hiding anymore. They wanted us to see them, to understand them, but I had a feeling we'd only scratched the surface of what they could do. In my tent I found a small crystal, perfectly formed, glowing with that same blue light. I knew it was a message. They were asking for our help. Something was coming. Something that would force us all to choose sides. I just didn't know then how soon that choice would come, or how much it would cost us. The crystal cave changed everything. We found it 3 days after Emily was taken off the mountain. Mike spotted the glow first, a soft blue light coming from deep inside the newly revealed cave system. None of us knew then that what we'd find inside would cost us more lives. The crystals are like nothing I've ever seen, Mike said, shining his flashlight on the cave walls. He was right. They weren't just growing from the walls. They were forming patterns, like a giant circuit board made of light. Some were as small as my finger, others bigger than a car. Chief Running Bear stopped at the cave entrance. His face looked older somehow, worried. My grandfather told me about this place, he said quietly. He called it the Heart of the Guardians. This is where they draw their power from. The deeper we went into the cave, the stronger the humming got. You could feel it in your teeth, like standing next to a giant speaker playing a note too low to hear. The crystals pulsed with light in time with the sound. That's when Chief Running Bear started telling us the real story. The Guardians aren't just protecting the mountain, he said, his voice echoing off the crystal walls. They're protecting us from what's inside it, something older than humans, something that sleeps in the deepest part of the mountain. The crystals keep it asleep. If they're disturbed, he didn't finish the sentence, he didn't need to. Mike couldn't resist studying the crystals. Look at this, he said, pointing to where the crystals seemed to be growing right out of the rock. It's like they're alive somehow, like they're... The crystal he was pointing at suddenly flashed bright blue. Before anyone could move, smaller crystals started growing up Mike's arm. He screamed, but it wasn't a scream of pain. His eyes were wide with wonder. I can see it, he gasped. I can see what they're protecting. It's... Those were his last words. The crystals kept growing faster and faster until Mike was completely encased. When we finally got to him, his body had turned to crystal from the inside out. Chief Running Bear rushed forward, placing his hands on the crystal that had been Mike. He started chanting in his native language, and the crystals responded, glowing. Brighter. The mountain is waking up, he said, his voice shaking. The ancient one inside, it's starting to stir. The Guardians can't hold it back much longer. As if answering him, the whole cave trembled. Cracks appeared in the ceiling, but not random ones. They formed more of those strange symbols we'd seen before. Chief Running Bear read them out loud, translating. When the ice melts, when the heart is exposed, the sleeper will... He never finished. The cave shook again, harder this time. A column of crystals shot up from the ground, surrounding him. Unlike Mike's death, this looked peaceful. Chief Running Bear smiled as the crystals grew around him. It looked like he was becoming part of the mountain itself. Before the crystals covered his face completely, he looked at me. You must choose, Bill Hudson, he said. The mountain chose you to understand, to help. The Guardians can't do this alone anymore. The crystals sealed over him, and just like that, we lost another friend. But somehow I could still feel his presence in the cave, like he wasn't really gone, just changed into something else. Later, that night sitting in my tent, I felt something I'd never felt before. The mountain wasn't just a mountain anymore. It was alive. And through the crystals, through the Guardians, through whatever Chief Running Bear had become, it was trying to tell us something. I held the small crystal they'd left in my tent. It was glowing brighter now, and in its light, I could see shadows moving. Shadows of what was coming. And I knew we didn't have much time left. The government helicopters arrived at dawn. I counted 6 of them, black and serious looking, carrying teams of scientists and military personnel. They landed right next to our base camp, their rotor blades stirring up clouds of snow. Mr. Hudson? A woman in a dark suit stepped out, flanked by 2 soldiers. I'm Dr. Sarah Chen from the Advanced Research Division. We're here about the unusual activity you've reported. I could feel the crystal in my pocket growing warmer. The Guardians were watching, waiting. We've been monitoring the seismic activity, Dr. Chen continued, unfolding a laptop. These patterns aren't natural. And the energy readings from the cave system, she stopped, staring at her screen. That's impossible, the readings just doubled. That's when we all felt it, a deep rumble that shook the whole mountain. But this wasn't like the controlled tremors the Guardians made. This was different. Angry. Get everyone off the mountain, I shouted, but it was too late. The ground split open between us and the helicopters. Steam shot out of the cracks, and with it came that haunting blue light we'd seen in the caves. The Guardians appeared then, all of them at once. They stepped out of the mist like they were made of it, their eyes glowing brighter than I'd ever seen. The soldiers raised their weapons, but with just a wave of their huge hands, the Guardians turned the guns to dust. Dr. Chen's laptop started sparking. All their equipment was going crazy. The energy readings, she gasped. Something's rising from deep inside the mountain. I could feel it too. The thing Chief Running Bear had warned us about. The ancient one that slept in the mountain's heart. It was waking up. The ice that had kept it asleep for thousands of years was almost gone. The largest Guardian turned to me, and suddenly my head was filled with images. I saw what they'd been protecting us from. A creature older than time, powerful enough to break the world if it fully woke up. The crystals weren't just pretty lights. They were like bars on a cage, keeping this thing sleeping. We need to leave now, Dr. Chen ordered. We'll send in a containment team. The Guardian shook its massive head. More images filled my mind. They'd been containing this force for thousands of years. Human weapons and science couldn't help. But they needed something else, a human connection. Someone to help them, to be a bridge between their world and ours. The mountain shook harder. Cracks spread across the glacier like spider webs. The Ancient One was pushing against its crystal, cage fighting to wake up. Hudson! Dr. Chen grabbed my arm. We have to go. But I knew what I had to do. The Guardians had chosen me for a reason. Maybe it was because of all my years on the mountain, or maybe because I'd lost everything else and wasn't afraid anymore. Pulled away from Dr. Chen and walked toward the Guardians. Behind me I heard her shouting, heard the helicopter starting up. But ahead of me the largest Guardian held out its hand. In it was a crystal bigger than any I'd seen before, glowing with that same blue light. What will happen to him? I heard Dr. Chen ask. The Guardian who'd given Chief Running Bear his vision answered in all our minds. He will become like us. Guardian, a protector. The mountain needs him. The earth cracked again. A wave of energy pulsed through the ground, strong enough to knock the helicopters sideways. The Ancient One was getting stronger. I reached for the crystal. As my fingers touched it, blue light raced up my arm. But it didn't hurt. It felt like coming home. The change didn't hurt like I thought it would. As the crystal's light spread through my body, I could feel the mountain's power flowing into me. My mind opened up like a flower, and suddenly I could sense everything. Every crack in the ice, every crystal in the caves. every heartbeat of the Ancient One struggling to wake up. The other guardians gathered around me in a circle. Their eyes glowed the same blue as mine now were. Together we raised our hands, and I felt power flow between us like electricity. The crystals throughout the mountain lit up all at once, creating a net of blue light that wrapped around the whole peak. Look! Dr. Chen shouted from the helicopter. The cracks in the ground were sealing themselves up. The angry rumbling from deep below got quieter, gentler, like a giant going back to sleep. I could feel the Ancient One's thoughts now. It wasn't evil, just very, very old and very powerful. Too powerful for our world. It needed to sleep, to dream its ancient dreams while humanity grew and learned. Maybe someday we'd be ready for it to wake up, but not yet. The last thing I saw before the transformation finished was Dr. Chen writing in her notebook. I knew what the official report would say, that a series of earthquakes had made the mountain too dangerous to study, that the cave system had collapsed, that the strange lights and seismic patterns were just natural phenomena we didn't yet understand. That was fine. Some secrets need to stay secret. Now I walk the mountain paths no human can see. My body is different, stronger, taller, covered in thick fur that keeps me warm even in the worst storms. But my mind is still mine, even though it can reach so much further now. The government declared this area off-limits, too dangerous for regular climbers. They posted warning signs and guards, but they don't really need to. We Guardians make sure nobody gets too close to the dangerous parts. Usually all it takes is a few mysterious footprints or strange lights in the sky to make people turn back. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I sit on the highest peak and look down at the lights of the towns below. I can feel Chief Running Bear's presence in the crystals around me, and I know I made the right choice. I miss my old life sometimes, but I have a new family now, a new purpose. Every now and then, a lost climber or a stranded hiker needs help. That's when I use my old search and rescue skills, but in a new way. I guide them to safety with gentle tremors that turn them away from dangerous paths, or lights that lead them toward rescue teams. They never see me, but they feel the mountain, helping them. The Ancient One still sleeps below, dreaming its endless dreams. Through the crystals, I sometimes catch glimpses of these dreams, of worlds that were and worlds that might be. The other Guardians teach me something new every day about our powers, about the mountain's secrets, about the delicate balance we keep. And on special nights, when the moon is full and the air is crystal clear, I reach out with my mind and touch the dreams of people in the towns below. I share a little of what I've learned, that there's magic in the world if you know where to look, that mountains can whisper if you know how to listen, and that sometimes the best way to find yourself is to become something more than human. The crystal around my neck glows softly, reminding me it's time for my patrol. There are new cracks to seal, new paths to guard, new wonders to protect. This is my home now. This is my purpose. This is my mountain. I never thought fog could kill until that summer in the Everglades. My name is Rachel Martinez, and I'm a ranger and environmental scientist at Everglades National Park. What I'm about to tell you changed everything I thought I knew about nature, science, and reality itself. It started on June 15, 1988, the most humid day we'd ever recorded in the park. The air was so thick you could almost drink it. I remember checking my equipment that morning, making sure my water testing kit was ready for another day of samples. The sun hadn't even risen yet, but sweat was already running down my back as I loaded my gear into the airboat. Another day in paradise, I muttered to myself, forcing a smile. Truth is, I was worried. The park had been acting strange lately. Water levels in some areas were rising without any rain, and my recent paper about chemical changes in the swamp had caused quite a stir among my colleagues. Some called my findings impossible, if they only knew what was coming. Dr. Carlos Ruiz, our head hydrologist, was already at the dock when I arrived. His usually neat gray hair was messy from the humidity, and dark circles under his eyes told me he hadn't slept much. Rachel, he called out, waving a stack of papers. "These readings from yesterday. Have you seen anything like this before?" I took the papers and my stomach dropped. The water samples showed traces of elements that shouldn't exist in nature. Not in the Everglades, not anywhere. "Maybe the equipment is malfunctioning," I suggested. But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't true. We'd triple-checked everything. That's when I saw it for the first time. A strange patch of mist hovering over the water about 50 yards away. Now, morning fog isn't unusual in the Everglades, but this was different. It was too dense, too alive. As we watched, it seemed to move against the wind, like it had a mind of its own. Carlos saw it too. He grabbed his camera and started taking photos. "This could be related to those weird readings," he said excitedly. "We need to get closer." I should have stopped him. Should have trusted that cold feeling creeping up my spine. But I was a scientist, and scientists don't believe in ghost stories or monsters in the mist. At least, that's what I told myself back then. Little did I know, this was just the beginning. The Everglades had awakened something ancient and hungry, something that would turn our world upside down and make us question everything we thought we knew about reality. And I was about to learn that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones made of nothing but air and memory. Over the next few days, things got stranger. The animals knew something was wrong before we did. I'd been working in the Everglades for 8 years, and I'd never seen anything like it. The alligators, usually lazy and still in the summer heat, started moving away from certain areas of the water. Birds would suddenly change direction mid-flight, avoiding patches of mist like they were solid walls. Even the insects went quiet when the fog rolled in. I kept taking water samples, trying to make sense of it all. Each morning I'd motor out in my airboat, watching the mist grow thicker and spread further. The weird part wasn't just how it looked, it was how it behaved. "Watch this," I said to Anna Thompson, one of our park guides, one morning. I tossed a small stick into a patch of fog. Instead of falling straight down, it curved, like the mist had caught it and pushed it away. Anna's face went pale. "That's not natural," she whispered. "Yesterday I was leading a tour group and..." She hesitated. "We lost time." "Lost time?" I asked, my stomach tightening. We entered a foggy area at 2:15 p.m. When we came out, our phones and watches showed 3:45. But nobody remembered what happened during that hour and a half. The tourists thought their watches were broken, but all 6 of them showed the same time. I wrote everything down in my notebook, my hands shaking slightly. That same day, 3 different park workers reported similar stories. People would walk through a patch of mist and come out confused, missing chunks of their memory. The water levels kept rising too. We'd check the depth markers every morning, and they'd be an inch higher than the day before. No rain, no upstream flooding, nothing to explain it. It was like the swamp itself was growing. Dr. Ruiz was getting more excited by the day. "This could be the discovery of the century," he'd say, rushing from one test site to another. But I noticed he was starting to look tired, distracted. Sometimes I'd catch him staring into the mist, muttering to himself. One evening, as I was packing up my equipment, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A thick bank of fog was moving across the water, but this time it had shapes in, like shadows of people walking, but when I looked directly at them, they vanished. I called out to Carlos, who was taking samples nearby. "Do you see that?" He turned, and for a moment the mist seemed to reach for him, tendrils of gray stretching out like fingers. He stepped back quickly, almost falling. "The readings are off the charts," he said, showing me his equipment. The numbers made no sense. They showed impossible combinations of elements, things that couldn't exist in nature. That night, I stayed late at my office, going through old park records. There had to be some explanation, something in the park's history that could help us understand what was happening. As I read, the fog outside my window grew thicker, and I swear I could hear whispers in it, voices so faint I couldn't make out the words. I didn't know it then, but we were about to learn that some scientific discoveries come with a terrible price. The morning Dr. Ruiz disappeared started like any other. The sun was barely up, and I was checking my equipment when I heard his airboat heading out into the swamp. That was the last time anyone saw him, at least in human form. 3 hours later, we found his empty boat drifting in a thick patch of fog. His equipment was still there, his notebook open to a half-written sentence. "The mist is not mist, it's..." That was all. I was the one who had to call his wife. How do you tell someone their husband vanished into thin air? That night, as we searched the area with flashlights and boats, I heard his voice calling from the fog. "Rachel, Rachel, I can see everything now." But when we turned our boats toward the sound, the voice moved, always staying just out of reach. Sometimes it would fade into whispers, sometimes break into strange laughter. By midnight, even the bravest rangers were spooked. Anna Thompson, our guide, took it especially hard. She blamed herself for not speaking up sooner about the strange things she'd seen. A week after Carlos disappeared, she went out alone to check one of the nature trails. "I think I know what's happening," she told me that morning. "The mist. It shows you things. Memories, not just yours, everyone's." Her eyes had a strange, distant look. "I saw my grandmother yesterday, Rachel. She's been dead for 10 years, but she was right there in the fog, baking cookies like she used to. I begged her not to go out alone, but she wouldn't listen. When we found her the next day, she was empty. Not dead exactly. Her heart was beating, but her body was dried out like old leather, and her eyes stared at nothing. She died in the hospital 3 days later, still mumbling about memories in the mist. That's when we first saw it clearly. The thing we started calling the Mist Walker. Officer Mark Davidson spotted it first during his night patrol. He radioed in, his voice shaking. "There's someone walking on the water. No, not on it, in it. It's... oh God, it's looking at me." We heard his scream over the radio. By the time we reached him, he was knee-deep in shallow water, crying and pointing at things none of us could see. "They're all there," he kept saying. "Everyone I ever failed to save. They're all in the fog." Mark lasted 2 more days before. He walked into the swamp during his lunch break and held himself under the water. We couldn't stop him. It was like he couldn't even hear us calling. Professor Helen White arrived from the university to study what was happening. She was smart, careful, and didn't believe in ghost stories. "Everything has a scientific explanation," she said, setting up her fancy monitoring equipment around the park. But even she couldn't explain what her machines recorded. Sounds that didn't exist, energy patterns that broke the laws of physics, and temperatures that changed impossibly fast. The fog was getting stronger. It would creep up to the buildings now, pressing against the windows like it was trying to get in. Sometimes we'd see faces in it, faces we knew, faces from old photographs, faces that couldn't possibly be there. Professor White was recording readings one evening when the mist surrounded her. We watched in horror as she just dissolved into it like sugar in hot water. But we could still hear her voice, taking notes, making observations. Fascinating. The molecular structure appears to be... Oh, I see now. Her voice still drifts. Through the fog some nights, endlessly describing what she sees there. But nobody dares to get close enough to listen anymore. The thing in the mist was growing stronger, feeding on our fear and our memories, and soon it would show us exactly what it could do. After losing 4 people to the mist, I knew I had to find answers. I set up my office like a detective's room, with maps showing where each incident happened, where the fog appeared most often, and where the water levels were highest. There had to be a pattern. I started wearing a small camera around my neck and carrying a tape recorder. Day 15 of the investigation, I recorded one morning. The fog seems thickest where memories are, the strongest. I'd noticed it gathered most heavily around places where important things had happened. The dock where school groups gathered. The lookout point where a ranger had saved a kid from drowning last year. The trail where an old couple had gotten engaged 50 years ago. The park was almost empty now. We'd closed it to visitors after what happened to Professor White, but that didn't stop the mist. If anything, it seemed hungrier without tourists to feed on. One afternoon, while checking the water samples, I found something weird. The fog wasn't just water vapor. It had tiny particles in it that glowed under my microscope. They moved like they were alive, swimming in patterns that reminded me of brainwaves. "It's not just collecting memories," I said into my recorder. "It's storing them somehow, like a computer saves files." That's when I heard Carlos's voice again, right behind me. "You're getting closer, Rachel, but you're still thinking too much. Like a scientist." I spun around, but of course he wasn't there. Just a tendril of mist retreating through my open window. The voice had sounded so real, so present, not like a memory at all. That night, I broke protocol and stayed in the park. After dark, I needed to see what the mist did when it thought no one was watching. Setting up my equipment in the observation tower, I waited. Around midnight, the fog began to glow. Not bright like a light bulb, but with a soft blue-white shine that reminded me of old TV screens. And in that glow, I saw them. Scenes playing out like movies in the air. I saw Carlos taking samples on his last day, Anna giving her final tour, Mark patrolling the paths, Helen setting up her machines. But I also saw things from years ago, children playing, boats passing, animals hunting. The mist was like a film projector, showing pieces of the past. My hands shook as I wrote everything down. The mist wasn't just taking memories, it was collecting them, saving them, and now it was strong enough to show them to anyone who watched. But why? What did it want? The answer came from an unexpected place, my own memories. As I watched the scenes in the fog, I saw myself as a little girl, visiting the Everglades with my grandmother. We were feeding the birds, and she was telling me an old story about the swamp. The ancestors believe this place remembers everything that happens here. Every footstep, every whisper, every laugh and tear. The water holds them all. My grandmother's voice echoed in my head as I stared at my notes. The water holds them all. The rising water levels, the strange elements in our samples, the way the fog seemed to think. "Oh my God," I whispered. "The swamp isn't just remembering, it's waking up." As if in response, the mist pressed against the tower windows. In its swirling patterns, I saw faces, hundreds of them. All the people who had ever been here, all trying to tell me something at once. I grabbed my phone to call for help, but it was too late. The fog was seeping in through every crack, and in its depths I saw something moving. Something that had been waiting for someone to finally understand. The Mistwalker was coming for me, and now I knew what it was. Not a monster, not a ghost, but something much older. The memory of the swamp itself, given form by all the stories, fears, and wonders it had collected over centuries. As the fog filled the room, I made one last recording. "I know what you are now, and I know you want to show me something. So show me." The last thing I wrote in my notebook before the mist took me was, "Sometimes, to solve a mystery, you have to become part of it." The mist swallowed me whole. At first I couldn't see anything, except swirling gray. Then the memories started, not just mine, but everyone's. They flashed around me like scenes from 1,000 movies playing all at once. I saw Carlos's last moments, his excitement turning to wonder, then fear, as the fog wrapped around him. I watched Anna discovering the truth about the memories, her mind breaking under the weight of too many stories at once. I felt Mark's despair, as the guilt of old memories drove him into the water. "Stop!" I shouted, but my voice seemed to float away into the fog. "I don't want to see this." "But you have to see," whispered a voice that sounded like everyone and no one. "You have to understand." The mist twisted into a shape. The Mistwalker. It wasn't scary like a monster in a movie. It was beautiful and terrible, like a cloud trying to be human. Where its face should have been, I saw rippling reflections of thousands of faces. Everyone who had ever visited the Everglades. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "To remember," it answered. "To share, to grow." The fog grew thicker, pressing in on me from all sides. I felt it trying to seep into my mind, trying to take my memories like it had taken the others. But something was different this time. My grandmother's voice echoed in my head again. "The water holds them all." And suddenly I understood what I had to do. Instead of fighting the memories, I opened my mind to them. I let myself feel everything. The joy of children seeing their first alligator, the peace of old couples walking the trails, the excitement of scientists making discoveries, even the fear of those the swamp had taken. "I'll remember with you," I said to the mist walker, "but you have to let me choose how." The fog paused like it was thinking. Around me, the memories swirled faster and faster, threatening to tear my mind apart. But I held on to who I was, Rachel Martinez, scientist, ranger, protector of this place. "You don't need to take people to keep their memories," I told it. "Let me show you another way." I thought about my water samples, about the way memories seemed to live in the tiny particles I'd seen. What if the fog could store memories without taking the people who made them? The mist walker moved closer, curious. Its form shifted and changed, showing me faces I knew. Carlos, Anna, Mark, Helen. They weren't gone, not really. They were part of the swamp's memory now, part of its story. "We can work together," I said. "I can help you remember without hurting anyone else, but you have to let them go." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then I heard Carlos's voice clearer than ever. "Listen to her. She understands." Other voices joined in. Anna, Mark, Helen, and hundreds more I didn't know. They weren't scared anymore. They were part of something bigger, something ancient and alive. The fog around me began to glow with that soft blue-white light. I felt the memories washing through me. But this time they didn't hurt. I wasn't losing myself. I was becoming something more. "Yes," the mistwalker whispered, its voice now a gentle hum. "You understand the balance." Slowly, the pressure eased. The overwhelming flood of memories settled into a gentle stream. I could still feel them all, but they weren't trying to drown me anymore. I opened my eyes, had they been closed, and found myself back in the observation tower. The fog was still there, but different now. Less hungry, more peaceful. My hands were glowing slightly, tiny particles of light dancing under my skin. When I touched the window, the fog responded, swirling into patterns I somehow understood. I grabbed my recorder with shaking hands. The mist isn't our enemy. It's the memory of the Everglades itself trying to protect its stories. And now I'm part of it. Not lost like the others, but changed. I can feel the memories, read them like a book. And I can help the mist remember without hurting anyone else. Outside, the sun was rising, turning the fog into rivers of gold. In its light, I saw brief glimpses of everyone the swamp remembered. All the lives, all the stories, all the moments, big and small, that made this place what it was. I wasn't just Rachel Martinez anymore. I was something new, part scientist, part story keeper, part memory of the swamp itself. And I had work to do. "I know you're listening," I said to the fog. "Let's make some new memories together. Better ones." The mist swirled in agreement, and somewhere in its depths I heard my grandmother laughing. That was 3 months ago. The Everglades National Park is open again, but things are different now. There's a new sign at the entrance that reads, "Special Memory Study Area, Expert Guide Required." That expert is me. My skin still glows sometimes, especially when the fog is thick. The tiny lights under my skin dance whenever I'm near the water, like little stars responding to the swamp's memories. The doctors can't explain it, but I don't need them to anymore. I understand what I am now. I take small groups through the park, showing them the safe paths where the mist is gentle. I can feel when the fog is hungry, when it has too many memories and needs to share them. Those are the days I close certain trails and guide people to calmer areas. Sometimes visitors hear voices in the mist, Carlos explaining water samples, Helen describing her discoveries, Anna pointing out birds that aren't there anymore. But nobody disappears now. The swamp has learned to share its memories without taking new ones. I write everything down in my daily reports. The mist showed 3 memories today. One from 1962, a family picnic. One from 1995, a school field trip. One from last week, 2 kids seeing their first butterfly. The Park Service files these reports in a special cabinet marked Unexplained Phenomena. Late at night, when the park is empty, I sit by the water and talk to the fog. Sometimes it shows me things nobody else has seen for hundreds of years. Native tribes canoeing through the marshes, old explorers mapping the waterways, animals that don't exist anymore. Carlos's wife visits sometimes. She says she can feel him here, peaceful and happy, part of something bigger than himself. I don't tell her that I can hear him humming old Spanish songs in the mist while he takes his endless water samples. The mistwalker still appears now and then, but it's not scary anymore. We're partners now, the swamp and I, keeping its memories safe and sharing them with people who are ready to understand. After all, every place has its stories. The Everglades just found a special way to remember them. I should have listened to the warnings. The scratches on the walls, the strange symbols. They were trying to tell us something. But I was too excited, too eager to make history. Now, as I sit here in my silent world, unable to hear even my own voice, I need to share what happened in those caves. Maybe it'll stop others from making the same mistake. My name is Michael O'Connor. Mike to everyone who knows me. I've been a cave rescue specialist at Mammoth Cave National Park for 15 years. I thought I knew every tunnel, every passageway, every dark corner of this vast underground maze. Until that day in June 1992, when Tommy, one of our junior rangers, came running into my office out of breath and eyes wide with excitement. Mike, we found something," he gasped. "Behind the Morrison section, there's a crack that wasn't there before. Yesterday's small earthquake must have opened it up." I grabbed my gear without hesitation. This was what I lived for. Mammoth Cave is the longest known cave system in the world, but we always suspected there were hidden sections we hadn't discovered yet. I dreamed of finding one my entire career. The crack was barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, but our initial sonar readings showed something massive beyond it. A whole new cave system, untouched by human hands. The equipment showed vast chambers, deep chasms, and passages that seemed to go on forever. Within days, I had assembled the best team I could find. Dr. Sarah Phillips, our geologist, couldn't stop talking about the unique mineral formations she spotted through the crack. Tom Bradford, my trusted equipment expert, was already setting up our most advanced gear. Lisa Wong, a bright graduate student specializing in cave ecosystems, and Dave Mitchell, who knew these caves better than his own house, completed our team. The day we were finally ready to enter, I stood before the crack with my flashlight, feeling like those first explorers who found Mammoth Cave centuries ago. The beam of light disappeared into the darkness beyond, and a cold breeze carried something that sounded almost like whispers. I remember thinking it was just the wind. I remember telling myself that the goosebumps on my arms were from the cold, not fear. I remember assuring everyone that the strange echoes were normal cave acoustics. I was wrong. God, I was so wrong. That first step through the crack felt like entering another world. Our headlamps cut through darkness that seemed thicker than usual, somehow heavier. The air was different too. Not just cave cool, but cold in a way that made your bones ache. "Everyone stay close," I said, checking my radio for the 100th time. "Tom, how's the equipment reading?" Tom frowned at his devices. "Something weird, Mike. The signals keep jumping around. Never seen anything like it." We moved slowly, marking our path with bright orange tape every few feet. The cave walls were different from anything I'd seen in my 15 years of exploring. They were smooth in places where they shouldn't be, rough in places that didn't make sense. Sarah kept stopping to take samples, muttering to herself about impossible formations. Then Lisa found the paintings. "Mike, everyone, you need to see this." Her voice echoed strangely, bouncing back to us like it was coming from multiple directions. We gathered around her light beam. There on the wall were paintings unlike any cave art I'd ever seen. They weren't the usual hunting scenes or handprints. These were different. Shapes that hurt your eyes if you looked at them too long. And figures, tall, twisted figures, that seemed to be made of sound waves with too many angles and curves that shouldn't work together. "These can't be real," Dave whispered, touching one of the paintings. "The pigments look fresh, but that's impossible. This section's been sealed for thousands of years." That's when our first piece of equipment failed. Tom's main sonar scanner just died. No warning, no low battery, just dead. The backup wouldn't turn on either. And in the silence that followed, we all heard it. A sound like someone humming, but not quite human. It came from deeper in the cave, and when we turned to look, our lights seemed dimmer than before. Sarah laughed nervously. Just air moving through the passages, right, Mike? I nodded, but I didn't believe it. In all my years in these caves, I'd never heard anything like that. It was almost musical, and it seemed to be calling us deeper. Against my better judgment, we pressed on. The passage widened into a massive chamber, and our lights couldn't reach the ceiling. The temperature dropped so low we could see our breath, then suddenly got so warm we started sweating. And all the while that humming grew, louder, clearer, more purposeful. "Check this out," Dave called, his flashlight beam shaking slightly. On the wall ahead were symbols, deeply carved into the rock. They looked like warning signs, but warning about what? And who had carved them so deep in this unexplored cave? I should have turned us back right then. But I didn't. And that's when things started going very, very wrong. The first real sign that something was terribly wrong came when Sarah screamed. We'd split into two groups to map the chamber. Sarah and Tom checking the left side, while Lisa, Dave, and I took the right. Sarah's scream echoed through the cave like a gunshot. I ran toward the sound, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly. "Sarah! Tom! What happened?" We found them backed against a wall. Sarah's face was white as chalk and Tom's hands were shaking as he pointed to his temperature gauge. "It was 40 degrees a minute ago," he said. "Now it's reading 95. That's impossible." But that wasn't what had made Sarah scream. On the wall in front of them was a handprint, fresh, wet, glowing slightly in our lights. As we watched, it slowly faded away like it was sinking into the rock. "Maybe it's some kind of chemical reaction," Lisa suggested, but her voice trembled. "Some caves have minerals that can—" She never finished that sentence. A deep boom echoed through the chamber like someone had struck a giant drum. The sound kept getting louder and louder until we had to cover our ears. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. "We need to get out of here," Dave said. "Something's not right." That's when Sarah noticed her digital camera was dead. Not just the battery, the whole thing was fried. Tom's backup sensors, too. One by one, every piece of electronic equipment. We had started failing. I tried my radio, static. Then through the white noise, we heard something that made my blood run cold. It sounded like singing, but not in any language I'd ever heard. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "It's just echoes," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sound does weird things in caves." Then Sarah began acting strange. She kept staring at one dark corner of the chamber, whispering, "Can't you see them? Can't you see the patterns?" I shined my light where she was looking. The wall seemed to ripple, like heat waves over hot pavement. The warning symbols we'd seen earlier were glowing now, pulsing with a faint blue light. Tom grabbed my arm. "Mike," he whispered, "look at the ceiling." I lifted my light. Hundreds of stalactites hung above us, but they were moving, swaying like seaweed in an invisible current. And in between them, something darker than the darkness was moving. Sarah suddenly clutched her head and fell to her knees, screaming about the noise. But I couldn't hear anything. Her nose started bleeding, and her eyes... God, her eyes were completely black. "We're leaving, now!" I shouted, grabbing Sarah's arm. But as we turned to go, the worst thing happened. Our last two flashlights died at the same time. In the pitch darkness, that strange singing grew louder, and now it was coming closer. In the darkness, I fumbled for my emergency flares. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped them. The red light sputtered to life, and I wished it hadn't. What we saw in that blood-red glow will haunt me forever. Sarah was still on her knees, blood now streaming from her ears. Her mouth was open in a silent scream, but her eyes were fixed on something behind us. Tom was the first to turn around. "Oh God," he whispered. "Oh God, no." It looked like a wave at first, a wave made of darkness and sound. It moved through the air like smoke but had a shape that kept changing. Sometimes it looked almost human, other times like nothing from this world. And it was watching us. I don't know how I knew that, but I did. We all did. The singing got so loud the cave walls started shaking. Small rocks fell from the ceiling. Sarah suddenly stood up, her movements all wrong like a puppet on strings. "It's beautiful," she said in a voice that didn't sound like hers. "Can't you hear what it's saying?" Before any of us could stop her, she walked toward the thing. The air around her began to twist, and then she just came apart. Not like an explosion, more like she was unmade, piece by piece, her scream cutting off in a way that still rings in my nightmares. "Run!" I yelled, grabbing Lisa's arm. Tom and Dave were already ahead of us, racing back toward the entrance. But the thing, the entity, it could move through rock, it flowed through. The walls like they were water, getting ahead of us. Tom tried to help. He pulled out his backup flare, thinking maybe the light would hurt it. That's when we learned it could control the cave itself. The ceiling above Tom just collapsed. 1 minute he was there, the next. We could hear his radio under the rocks, still working somehow. The sounds coming from it. I don't want to remember. Lisa stumbled, crying. "What is it? What does it want?" The entity answered her. Not in words, but in feelings and images that pushed into our minds. Showed us how long it had been here, sleeping in the deep dark. How our noise, our lights, our presence had awakened it. How it had been so long since it had fed. That's when it started playing with us. It could make us hear things that weren't there. Voices calling for help, exits that didn't exist. Dave almost fell into a bottomless pit, thinking he saw a way out. The entity could bend sound like a weapon, using echoes to confuse us, to herd us deeper into its territory. Lisa was next. She stopped suddenly, her eyes going distant. "I can hear my mom calling," she said softly. Before we could grab her, she walked straight into a dark chasm. We never found her body. The flare was dying now, and in its fading light, I saw the entity take a solid form for the first time. It rose up like a tower of living shadow, with points of light where eyes should, and it began to sing its terrible song again. Only Dave and I were left now. We huddled in a small side passage, sharing my last flare. The entity's singing echoed all around us, making it impossible to tell which way was out. Dave kept checking his compass, but it was useless. The needle just spun in circles. "Mike," Dave whispered, his voice shaking. "I've been thinking. The ancient warnings on the walls, the symbols, they weren't trying to keep people out. They were trying to keep that thing in." He was right. All those weird carvings we'd seen, they were some kind of ancient trap, a cage for this creature. And we'd just broken into its prison. The entity seemed to know what we were thinking. The singing changed to a sound like laughter, but wrong, like breaking glass and screaming wind all mixed together. Then Dave's eyes went wide. "Do you feel that?" he gasped. "The air. It's pulling." Before I could grab him, Dave started floating. Not like in space movies. This was violent, like he was being yanked by invisible hands. He screamed, trying to grab the walls, but the entity's power was too strong. Then, I can barely write this. The sound waves hit him. It was like watching someone turn a glove inside out. The sound of it was recorded on Dave's camera, which we found later. I made sure that recording was destroyed. I pressed myself against the wall, fighting the urge to throw up. I was alone now. Just me and this thing that had killed all my friends. The flare sputtered, almost dead. That's when I noticed something strange. Every time the entity made a sound, the old symbols on the walls glowed slightly. Not like before. This was different. They were responding to the sound waves like they were designed to catch them somehow. I had an idea. A crazy, terrible idea. But it was all I had left. I pulled out my last piece of working equipment, an old tape recorder I kept as a backup. The entity was getting closer. I could feel its presence like ice in my bones. The walls were starting to pulse with that weird light, and gravity went crazy. Stones floating up, then crashing down. "Hey," I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. "You like sound so much, let's see how you handle this." I pressed play on the recorder. I'd used it earlier to record the entity's own song. As the sound played back, the symbols on the walls blazed with light. The entity's form wavered like it was confused. For the first time, its singing faltered. But I knew this wouldn't hold it for long. I needed something bigger, something more. And then I saw it, a passage leading down, glowing with more symbols than anywhere else. Some kind of central chamber. That's where this would end, one way or another. The central chamber was huge, bigger than a football field. My last flare showed hundreds, maybe thousands of those glowing symbols covering every inch of the walls. They formed circles within circles, all pointing toward the center of the room. This wasn't just a prison cell. It was a trap designed to contain something ancient and powerful. The entity followed me in, its form now massive, filling the entrance like a storm cloud made of darkness. Its song had changed to something that made my teeth hurt and my vision blur. I could feel it trying to get into my head, showing me visions of my friends, trying to make me give up. "You want sound?" I shouted, my voice echoing off the walls. "I'll give you sound." I had both tape recorders now, mine and Dave's, which I'd found near where he died. I pressed play on both at the same time, playing back the entity's own song. The sound bounced off the walls, growing louder and louder. The symbols started glowing brighter than ever. The entity screamed, not like a human scream, but like metal tearing and rocks breaking all at once. It tried to escape, but the symbols were doing something to it. Every time it touched one, parts of it seemed to freeze in place, but it wasn't enough. The batteries in the recorders were dying, and the entity was fighting back. The cave started shaking violently. Rocks bigger than cars fell from the ceiling. I could feel blood running from my ears, just like Sarah before. That's when I saw it. In the center of the room was a deep pit with more symbols spiraling down into it. And at the bottom, something was glowing. Something that looked like crystal but hummed with energy. I knew what I had to do. I ran toward the pit, dodging, falling rocks. The entity realized what I was planning. It sent a wave of sound at me so powerful it cracked the stone under my feet. My ears felt like they were about to burst. I reached the edge of the pit and held up both recorders as high as I could. "Hey!" I screamed through the pain. "Come and get me!" The entity rushed at me like a tidal wave of darkness. At the last second, I threw myself to the side. The entity's momentum carried it straight over the pit, right as I tossed both playing recorders into the glowing crystal below. The sound that followed was like nothing on earth. The crystal amplified the recorded song 1,000 times. Light exploded from every symbol in the chamber. The entity writhed and twisted, its form breaking apart. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. The sound was too powerful, too pure. I felt something in my head pop, and the world went silent. The last thing I saw before passing out was the entity being pulled down into the pit, its form shrinking, compressing, as the ancient trap did what it was built to do. I woke up 3 days later in the hospital. The rescue team found me near the entrance of the cave, though I still don't remember how I got there. The doctors said the damage to my ears was permanent. I'll never hear anything again. Sometimes I think that's a blessing. The official report says there was a cave-in. 4 experienced cave explorers died in a tragic accident. The cave system has been sealed off. Tons of concrete poured into the entrance we found. They labeled it geologically unstable and put up warning signs, but they didn't find everything. Sometimes late at night I watch the video recordings we recovered. Most of them are damaged, just static and jumbled images. But there's one clear shot of the symbols on the walls. And when I play it with the volume up, even though I can't hear it anymore, I can see the speakers vibrate with a strange sound. The rescue teams reported weird equipment problems for weeks after. Their radios would pick up what they described as singing late at night. The park rangers say some of their monitoring devices near the cave still record odd noises, like something trying to speak. I think about my friends a lot. Sarah, who just wanted to study the rocks. Tom, who loved his gadgets, Lisa with all her big dreams, Dave, who knew these caves better than anyone. They deserved better than what happened down there. I left my job at the park. I couldn't stay knowing what was down there. But I keep tabs on the place. The new concrete seal has developed cracks 3 times now. They keep fixing them, but they keep coming back. You might be wondering why I'm sharing this story. Maybe it's because I need someone else to know the truth. Or maybe it's a warning. Because sometimes when I put my hand against a cave wall anywhere in the park, I can feel vibrations. Like something singing, something that's still waiting, something that's getting stronger.